everybody. Welcome to the Gapology Guys podcast. This is your home for unique leadership conversations where we share insights from our books, Gapology, IMBAR, and Speed of Purpose. And tonight we'll be sharing the third performance gap in the Gapology Framework, the action gap. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Good, Brian. How are you?
I'm fantastic. Very excited to do this episode. For our viewers, so the last two episodes, if you haven't had a chance to listen to those, go back and do so if you can. We are going through the Gapology Framework. We thought this year we'd sort of kind of go back to the basics and provide some of this base information that we really think everyone needs for all the other podcasts that we have coming up. And we did the knowledge gap, and then we did the importance gap over the last two episodes. And tonight we're going to do the action gap. That's the third and final performance gap in the sequence. And then next week, when we do our next episode, we'll be talking about all the root solutions. So there's 9 root solutions. Those are the methods, the tactics that you can use to go after how to close each of the gaps. So I'm excited for tonight and for us to be able to wrap this up. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, in the remote workforce, which is prevalent out there today, and with the onset of AI, Gapology is more relevant than ever. You as a leader, if you know it and can execute to it, you will lead the group. You'll lead the group forward. You'll lead the company forward. So the companies we've worked with are excelling dramatically with Gapology. So you got to get there. So it's relevant and significant, and 10 years from now, you'll still be using it. So.
Absolutely. And just to give everybody a little update, so knowledge gap, that's the what and the how. So does your team know what to do, or do they know how to do it? So knowledge, skills, those things. If the answer is no, then you have a knowledge gap. And we own that gap as leaders, so we need to always be thinking about that. The importance gap, that's the why and the when. So does the team know why they need to do something, and do they know when they need to do something within the scope of all of their competing priorities that they have going on? And we also own that as leaders. So if they don't know why or when, we own that. And the action gap is slightly different. So we're going to get into that and how it's a little bit different. We do own parts of that, but Mark will go through what the action gap is, and we'll give you the update on all that. So you want to kick her off?
Yeah, so when you get to the action gap, the knowledge gap and importance gap are closed, and you own that. So again, Brian just talked about it. The team knows what to do, how to do it. They know why it matters and when it must be done. So picture this as a new process you're rolling out. The action gap is actually doing it. So this is where I think Brian said where the rubber meets the road in a previous conversation. And so the action gap is the gap. It's, again, think of it KI and then this huge capital A. Knowledge, importance, and then action. And it's got to be the right action, though. And we found that we spent years observing the top performers, and they focused on the right action and nailed it. We spent years focused on the bottom performers. They didn't understand Gapology and focused on the wrong action. So it's got to be the right action, because that changes everything. And again, when you think about an action gap, it has measures. It's a metric. It's a KPI, you may call it, in your environment. And if you are achieving the KPI, you've closed the action gap. If you're missing the KPI, you have an action gap, and that's what you're looking for. So it's not only a metric, but it's the behaviors defined that equal that metric. And that's the big difference between the top performance, top 10%, and the bottom performance. What do you think, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, actually, I wrote something down quick that I don't think I've really grasped. So you talked about, we focus on the top performers, we focus on the bottom performers. And I think oftentimes leaders, they really only focus on the bottom. They're only focused on trying to improve that group without understanding what is possible by focusing on the A group.
Oh, let me talk about that for a minute.
Yeah.
So that's so true. So we found that leaders focus excessively on the bottom performers. And because of that, they don't understand the top performers.
Hmm.
So they don't even they're not as connected with the knowledge gap and importance gap and action gap closures of the top performers. So if they spend an equal amount of time with top performers and bottom performers, they totally get it and they can pass that knowledge on to the bottom performers and change the organizational results in dramatic fashion. We have actually done that and it works. We learned, the leader often thinks they know the most. Well, no, not necessarily. We
Yeah.
learned so much from the top 10%, the top performers. Go observe their behavior. Go show up and observe what they're doing. Look at their results, figure it out. They may know more than you, and they may have closed the gaps at a different level, and it changes the whole organization when the leader understands the top performers as well and doesn't waste all their time on the bottom.
Yeah.
The other thing it gives you the ability to do is take what you learned from the top performers, carry it to the bottom 10% and help them get better. We've seen in some cases the bottom 10% rise to the middle or the top because we taught them what the top was doing. So there's tactics that you may not know as the leader that you need to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And by doing that, you're creating your own knowledge gaps. So you don't know what's possible. You don't know what the top, performers are doing. So you have a knowledge gap there.
Yeah, so we were in retail and we were selling, you and I were selling $45 per customer, way outpacing the company. And we looked at the reports and we had a store that was selling $65 per customer. That doesn't make sense. What's going on? So I caught an airplane without them knowing it and flew to Maui. I guess I'll admit that. And it visited the store without them knowing who I am and figured out how they were using our tactics and achieving $65 versus 45. We then mastered that into a plan that we shared with the chain and we became the industry leaders in sales per customer because we there was a gap. It was a gap that it was an action gap that was big because we weren't performing at the level of Maui. Does that
Hmm.
make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
Changed
I,
everything for us.
yeah, I don't know how I didn't get invited to that trip, but that sounds like a very
I think
profitable
I
trip.
invited you, but you were going to Minneapolis for the weekend or something.
Yeah, yeah, Des Moines or something. Yeah,
But we learned so much.
yeah, yeah,
And then it changed the organization. We taught what Maui was doing to, what do we have, 1,000 stores at that time?
yeah,
Close to it, 1,000 stores, and everything changed.
yeah.
So gaps often go in both directions. You can have a gap where someone's not achieving. You can have a gap where someone's overachieving. As the leader, you better know what's going on.
Hmm. Yeah.
You better know.
And we had a episode a while back that we were talking about be a student. So we always talk about being a teacher, and teaching is one of the root solutions underneath the knowledge gap. But being a student, you almost have to be a student first so that you can really learn what you need to go and teach to the rest of the group.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We found that the top performing groups knew what the metrics needed to be. They may have been called KPIs, but they knew what the metrics were when the action gap was closed. Does that make sense?
Yep.
They knew what the metrics were. But the thing that changed everything is they also knew what the behaviors were that equaled those metrics. So they connected the behaviors and the metrics, and they had it. Once we learned that, we were able to achieve things we didn't even, perceive as possible before.
Mm.
So behaviors and metrics combined, closing the action gap, boom, industry leading results.
Yep. And the interesting thing too, I think here is that when you look at your performers on your team and you've got your A, B, and C, your top performers, middle performers, bottom performers, your A players, they want to know what they're being held accountable to. They want to know those metrics, those KPIs. They want to be recognized for it, celebrated for it when they achieve it. And then they also want the coaching. So, when they're underperforming, when they're struggling maybe a little bit, they need you as a leader to be able to provide that. And without having those metrics, they really don't know where they stand.
I went to a Major League Baseball game last weekend, and they have what's called a scoreboard.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And they put up the results,
Yeah.
and they put up the results by person, by player.
Wow, that's so
And
unique.
it's like very motivating to that player to have great results up on that scoreboard,
Hmm.
because their family's sitting there watching the results come by. So we found that the winning leaders were incredibly consistent at posting the results, publishing the results, ensuring that the result expectations were known by all. And that motivated the team to get there. It motivated the team to listen when there were conversations around things that needed to be in place and that things that were uh, the characteristics of the top 10%, and they could do these same things, and it changed everything. So we need to publish results. The winning leaders consistently published, correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, they published and celebrated the top performers, and they made it very clear to the entire team what they were doing to achieve those results. That is action gap closed. That's what that is. They shared closing the action gap, what that looked like, and it changed everything. In many cases, they did annual awards for those specific metrics, knowing that that's what action gap close looked like.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the opposite of that is true sometimes. So your bottom performers, they love it when you don't publish results. They like to hide in the weeds.
Yeah.
So sort of think about that. If you're not publishing your results, you're sort of hurting your top players, and then you're sort of rewarding those bottom players.
Yeah, the top players want their name on the scoreboard.
Yeah.
The bottom players may not want that, so maybe they shouldn't be on the team. They may not fit the team. So publishing results, making it public was a characteristic of the top performers. We learned that, and then we started publishing results weekly, and everything changed. We made them very transparent. Every week, everyone knew how everyone was performing. So if you look at the characteristics of the top performers, I'll give them to you real quick. They knew the results, they reviewed them, so they would know how everyone was performing. They then combined that with going out and observing behavior. So they would look at the behavior of the top performers and the behavior of the bottom performers. And oh, wow, it became quite clear why the results were different. They then listened and asked a lot of questions. So they weren't talking a lot, they were listening and asking questions so that they understood it. And from that, they identified the gaps in their team and they were able to close them. It became rather obvious. And through that, they became top performers. And we were doing this 20 years ago, 20 years ago now.
Yeah.
Um, and what we can tell you is those same top performing leaders that close the action gap are top performers today. So what they learned back then, they're using today and teaching to others, and they're incredibly successful. We are so proud of the people that we taught Gapology to in the early days because I mean, they're up to what, president level of
Yeah.
companies, of very successful companies,
Mhm.
and they built it on Gapology.
Yeah. Yeah. I just talked to one today, as a matter of fact. And I think it's it seems like such a simple process, but it's one that people don't do, and they sort of just look at the reports and go, okay, they might make a phone call, they might send an email, but to actually get up and go and observe it and look at what are the behaviors that are actually producing these results, and then being open enough, transparent enough with your team, creating that psychological safety with your team where you can ask questions, you can listen to the answers, you can maybe ask a probing question or two, and really get to know your team and find out what they're facing. What are some of those obstacles, those roadblocks that are kind of in the way? I think this process gives you the ability to do that.
Yeah, yeah. So the action gap is the gap. So when you close the knowledge gap, the importance gap, you're working to close the action gap. When the action gap closed, you're achieving great results. So think about that. KIA, and again, Kia, I haven't got the check yet, but they owe us a lot of money. We've made them quite famous. I think we were ahead of them in terms of KIA, knowledge, importance, and action.
Maybe,
The other thing that has become very clear to us is that remote work makes closing action gaps more difficult and that action gaps are more prevalent. So as a leader, you got to be really good at this in order to win in a remote work environment. You've got to know what your team is doing. So we found some behaviors that are critical there. So you've got to be really good at measuring the performance of remote workers. You've got to have KPIs that equal their performance so that you understand that. You've got to have regular follow-up so that you understand that as well. Brian said, I think you haven't made it a t-shirt yet, have you? Busy ain't productive.
I think we might have that one actually. I'm
Oh,
pretty
we
sure.
do.
I'm pretty
So
sure.
busy ain't productive. So often your team will say, hey, I'm really busy. I'm working hard.
Hmm.
Busy ain't productive. The metrics speak for how busy you are and if you're doing the right thing and if you're closing the action gap. So it's in the numbers. It's right there. So we found that the C group leaders were incredibly ineffective and tended to blame the team and not take ownership for action gap issues. As an owner, as a leader, you still own the action gap being closed. Your team just has to close it. You've got to lead them in that direction. The A group was incredibly consistent in follow up, giving feedback, and celebrating success. Let me give you those again. They were incredibly consistent in follow up on the results, feedback, conversations, discussing how to get there, and then celebration of the top. It was quite different. So the A group was the top 10%. Picture the C group as the bottom 10%. We spent a lot of time understanding the difference, and that was an incredible difference between those groups.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The C group was pointing fingers is sort of the visual I had in my mind. Where when you ask them, so, what's up with the results? Well, this person didn't do this and this person didn't do this. And, I hired the wrong guy here, or, this is the
Yeah, very
wrong
consistent
person.
message
Very, very much so.
of ineffectiveness.
Yep.
Yeah, huge.
Yeah. Yeah. No, exactly. But the A group, and then when you're talking about their results, they're very much willing to share those celebratory remarks. When you say something to them, well, they gave credit to other people, but along with it, when you ask, so what did you really do? What you talked there about the follow up feedback and celebration. That feedback element, it was really a sort of a coaching mindset that they felt that responsibility for being that teacher that we talked about earlier, being that coach, challenging when necessary, but also providing the positive feedback as well. So all of those elements.
Yeah, I worked in an organization, a retail organization, where I knew every Monday they were going to post the results and rank me for the prior week. So we went week by week. And because of that, I wanted to be number one each week. And I did the things that needed to be done to get me there. I it changed everything for me because I wanted my name on the scoreboard as number one. And so I learned how to close the action gap in order to get there. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yep.
Um, so understanding what the action gap is, it means that we miss the results. Fair enough.
Okay.
It means that the behaviors that equaled those results were not in place. So
Hmm.
we found that the A group, the top performers, connected the results very clearly with a set of behaviors that got to the results. So they knew that if the number wasn't there, that the behaviors were not there. Once they had that, they were able to close the action gap consistently over and over. And they were able to look at the numbers and understand where the action gap was closed and where it was a big gap. And once they learned that, they became top performers. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, as leaders, I think that's important to understand is that the results, the metrics, those are your pieces of evidence that you can look at to say, okay, so what created this?
Yeah.
And then you just take a step back and you say, okay, so now what were the behaviors that were supposed to be in place and why weren't they and so forth. And then you go and you use that coaching technique we talked about and you apply that to the behavior. So you don't coach the metric, you coach the behavior because that's going to change that result
Yeah,
overall.
that's what closes the gap.
Yep.
So whatever business you're in, whatever you're doing, whatever you're looking at, the action gap must be closed. If you're rolling out a new process or a new sales procedure, you better be good at closing the action gap or it will fail. And you may blame the process when it fails.
Yeah.
It's not the process.
Right.
It's
One other
not the,
thing,
it's the behaviors.
yeah, one other thing that I think is important. So, we're talking about metrics and all that. If you're in an organization and you don't have metrics, you don't have some sort of tangible thing that you can actually put on a spreadsheet or scoreboard, what do you think, Mark? What would be some tactics that you would use there?
Develop some metrics.
Figure out a way to measure it.
So, well, imagine a baseball team where you're not recording the batting average.
Yeah.
It's not gonna be good. So you have to have the metrics that equal to the behaviors that you're looking for. Brian and I rolled out Gapology to an organization that had 45 KPIs. So every frickin' thing that we measured mattered. That didn't work. So we closed the door and wouldn't let the executives out of the room until we narrowed it to five. We came up with five KPIs,
Mm,
five most important KPIs, of which we knew the behaviors that equaled that. And those are the ones we measured every week. And the business, God, they are the industry leader by far now.
Oh yeah,
We don't want to mention them because
definitely.
they'll be
Right.
embarrassed.
Right.
Once they narrowed to five KPIs, the five most important, and
Hmm.
they understood the behaviors already, their business, I think they've quintupled. It may be more than that now.
Hmm.
So a billion became 5 billion
Hmm.
because they closed the action gap.
Yeah.
So if you don't know what to measure, you're creating action gaps, trust me.
Yeah.
So you have to know what to measure, you have to know what matters, then you have to know the behaviors that equal those metrics,
Mhm.
and then everything changes. And wow.
Yeah, I was thinking about, so we had a colleague that worked with us that went to Africa, did some work in missionaries
Yes.
with churches and so forth over there. They figured out ways to measure stuff. You know, anybody can figure out a way to sort of, figure out at least how things are improving behaviorally, and you can put metrics to some of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, whatever.
Satisfaction scores. It could be, any of those kinds of things. There's a lot of
Yeah,
different.
whatever business you're in, there's a metric.
Right.
How many people attended church on Sunday
Exactly.
was what they started measuring.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
30 became 200.
Right.
Wow, how did that change?
Yeah.
They closed an action gap.
Hmm.
So you've got to be good at this, leaders. So some of the characteristics we found in the top performers were they communicated the gap to the team. So when they found a gap, they told the team about it. That helps a great deal. Hey, we're concerned about this. And they communicate the gap behaviorally. Here's what it is. They then were good at seeking to understand the gap, what's causing it. And they gained agreement from the team to close the gap. So they got all the leaders and said, okay, we're closing this gap, right? You got it. You're in, you're in, you're in. Okay. They would then practice and role play consistently, whatever the behaviors were to close the gap. And then they would, follow up with results and ensure that they created habit. We teach the habit ladder in Gapology. It's awesome. They would create habit around that thing, and that closes the action gap. Organizations that have rolled out the habit ladder have been incredibly successful. One of them just reported results on Wall Street today, and they were off the charts. So thank you. The habit ladder, which is in Gapology, is awesome. You should use it for everything that you need to create habit in. And again, it closes the action gap. So wow, I think that's what I know about the action gap.
Yeah. And we started talking today. We're like, okay, so what are we going to talk about with the action gap? I think we filled the time here very, very well. But if anybody has questions on this stuff, well, first of all, pick up Gapology. That's a great place to go first, or listen to it on Audible. We do have the Audible version as well, if you're more into that. Otherwise, reach out.
I would have both, by the way, just so you're clear. So I use both.
Mm-hmm.
So I will play a chapter. Everyone would think, if you wrote the chapter, why would you have to play it? I learned so much by playing it because the context changes and I learned from what was said back when. And so you need both the book and the book for everyone, which has an executive summary that can read in an hour and get started. But Audible does help because often we are in, we're in the car, we're in scenarios where we can listen in the AirPods to, Audible. And so you need both.
Right. I think you just miss hearing my voice.
I'm sorry.
Between the two.
Well, that's
podcasts.
true. Oh, that's right. You're the Audible voice.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Or maybe Joanne. My wife.
And Joanne. So you guys did a great job.
Yeah, thank you. But if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out. You can reach us on social media. LinkedIn's the best way, probably there. Otherwise, contact@gapology.org is our email. You can always reach out to us that way. And we'd love to hear from you. But thanks again, Mark, for another great episode.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone.
All right, everybody take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, that'll do it from here. For more information on any of the Gapology books or the workshop options that we provide, head on over to our website, gapology.org. Everyone have a fantastic week. We'll talk to you soon.